Welcome to monobiology. Today we're going to look at a type of chemical compound called carbohydrates. You've probably heard of carbohydrates. This is the scientific name for sugars. And you've probably also heard of things called carbs, which is just a short form of carbohydrates. What is a carbohydrate, though? A carbohydrate, as you can see down here, is a chemical compound consisting of carbon and water in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1, so CH2O. So that's how it gets its name, carbon and water. Hydrate means water. So carbohydrate, carbohydrates. And that's where the chemical gets its name from. It's CH2O. That's the general formula for all carbohydrates. Now, these particular carbohydrates right here, the trioses or the trioses, are 3-carbon sugars. These ones, the pentoses, are 5-carbon sugars, and the hexoses are 6-carbon sugars. And those 3 groups of sugars, the trioses, pentoses, and hexoses, make up a group of sugars called monosaccharides. Now, from our understanding of macromolecules, or polymers, monosaccharides are the monomers. They're the monomers of carbohydrates. And if you put 2 monosaccharides together, you get disaccharides. And if you put many monosaccharides together, you can get polysaccharides. Okay? Now, these chemicals that you see here, we're going to talk about in more detail. These are examples of each of these things, and we're going to learn about those a little bit later on in the lesson. But just in short, carbohydrates, general formula CH2O, carbon, and water. We have monosaccharides, which are the building blocks of carbohydrates. We have disaccharides, which have 2 monosaccharides in them, and we have polysaccharides, which have more than 2 monosaccharides in them. Here are the most common monosaccharides: glucose, fructose, galactose, are all 6-carbon monosaccharides. Deoxyribose and ribose are 5-carbon monosaccharides. Now, deoxyribose and ribose are the compounds that are found in DNA and RNA, respectively. You should be able to tell me what the chemical formulas for all of these are. But these are the most common monosaccharides, and they're, of course, going to be used to build the disaccharides. Now, disaccharides, as we said before, are the combination of 2 monosaccharides. The 3 most common disaccharides are as follows: sucrose, we have maltose, and one you've probably heard of, lactose. And that brings me to another point. You've probably noticed that a lot of these sugars, in fact, all of them, have the ending OSE. In chemistry, anything that ends in an OSE is in fact a carbohydrate. Okay, so these are the most common disaccharides. Sucrose is a combination of glucose and fructose. Maltose is a combination of 2 glucose molecules, and lactose is a combination of glucose and galactose. And where have you seen lactose before? Yeah, some people are lactose intolerant. It's milk sugar. And sucrose is the type of sugar that you find on people's tables that they put in their coffee and such. It's the white sugar that we usually see. It's also a main ingredient for lots of things. If you look on the back of a package, you'll see this a lot if you eat a lot of sugary things. And maltose is malt sugar, and it's often used for brewing purposes, things like wine and beer, things like that. Okay, so disaccharides form through a chemical reaction. We'll talk about what that is a little bit later on. But this is a demonstration here of how that reaction happens. Okay, so here you have glucose and glucose, and here now you have maltose plus a water molecule. And this is the same reaction, but it's a slightly different form. So here's the alpha form when they react like this and they form a linkage like this. See how the linkage is straight across? Here's the beta form where they form a cross linkage like that. That brings me to the next point. The type of bond that forms between monosaccharides when they form bigger saccharides like disaccharides or polysaccharides, this bond right here that forms between them is called a glycosidic bond. It's a covalent bond. It's not an intramolecular force, it's an intramolecular force. And as you can see, it holds the molecules, the two monosaccharides, in this case this is sucrose because this is fructose and this is glucose, but it holds the two molecules together quite nicely. And that's called a glycosidic bond or glycosidic linkage, depending on where you see it. And that brings us to a conversation about polysaccharides. So here we have two polysaccharides. This one is called starch, which has a scientific name of amylose. And it is a storage sugar in plants. And we know we eat starchy foods. We've got lots of breads and potatoes, probably have a lot of starch in them, as well as pasta. Those things have a lot of starch in them. And what does that mean? Well, a polysaccharide, as you can see, is made up of a chain of repeating glucose molecules. Okay, so you take the monosaccharides, you put a bunch of them together, upwards of thousands in some cases. That's what this N means. It means there's some number of them. And you put them together. And if you do it this way, the way that we put these glucose molecules together, you end up with starch. But if you can put them together in different ways, you can end up with different molecules. And so starch is a molecule found in plants. It's a storage sugar. It helps store sugar. There's also a storage molecule in animals. The storage molecule in animals is called glycogen. And it also involves glucose molecules, but they're put together in a slightly different way. Now this molecule down here, this one right here, this molecule is called cellulose. And cellulose is a structural sugar found in plant cell walls. And it essentially keeps the plant cell from bursting. And it obviously has to have different properties than a storage sugar. It has to be structurally stable. So it involves glucose molecules put together in a different way. There's another structural sugar that's found in animals, and it's called chitin. And chitin is found in exoskeletons, so like crab shells and lobster shells. And again, it's put together in a different way than glycogen and starch would be, because it's a structural sugar. So there's more than one use for sugars. You can store energy, or you can make structural items out of them. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the metabolic reactions of carbohydrates. There are two main reactions involving carbohydrates. One of them breaks apart saccharides, and the other one brings them together. So right here, in this picture, we have a disaccharide. Notice the disaccharide is being added to water. This reaction is called hydrolysis because we're using water to split the molecule apart. Hydro meaning water, lysis meaning to split. So we have a disaccharide here. We take it, we add water to it. This would be inside a cell. It would be an enzyme catalyzed reaction, which means it wouldn't just happen on its own. And we would end up with the two monosaccharides. Okay, so this is called a hydrolysis reaction, splitting using water. On the other hand, when we want to put molecules together, monosaccharides together, we have a condensation reaction. And what happens is that the two molecules come together, forming a disaccharide and releasing water. So every time two monosaccharides come together, or a disaccharide and a monosaccharide, or so on and so forth, you end up getting a product that is water. Okay, so that's a condensation reaction. Condensation reaction brings molecules together. Now, why are they called metabolic reactions? Metabolic reactions is essentially the sum of all the reactions that take place inside your body. You've heard of that term before, metabolism. So these are the two different types of metabolic reactions. You have either breaking down, which would be the hydrolysis, or you have building up, which would be the condensation reaction. Both of those are considered metabolic reactions. Now, if you think about it, we eat starch. We need to break down the starch inside of our bodies so we can get simpler sugars that we can use to make energy with. So that would be a hydrolysis reaction. But we also then, if we eat enough sugar, need to store the sugar. So we need to use condensation reactions to turn these molecules into polysaccharides so that we can store them. I want you to try this. What is the chemical formula for sucrose? So I've written here a little equation. I want you to fill in. I want you to write a balanced chemical equation. You've got glucose plus fructose. I want you to write your answer in and bring that to class. One other important metabolic reaction that we have that I didn't mention is called cellular respiration. And the main sugar that enters the pathway for cellular respiration is glucose. Glucose plus oxygen gives us a lot of energy, carbon dioxide, and water. But that in a nutshell is your introduction to carbohydrates. Go back, look through, take some good notes on this, and bring your questions to class. Here are the references for this lesson.